following preview was begrudgingly approved for all audiences.
You're listening to Elevator Music.
Welcome back to Forward Thinking, presented by the Professional Collegiate League. I'm Ricky Vellante, and I'll be joined by my co-host, David West. As usual, we'll be talking to those challenging the status quo, doing social good, and bringing about positive change to the world, while also talking a little bit of sports. In this episode, we have two special guests. First, we'll be joined by Shanti Das, founder and executive director of Silence the Shame, to continue our conversation around mental health awareness. Then we'll be joined by Dondré Whitfield, Emmy-nominated actor most recently starring on Queen Sugar, speaker, mentor, and now author. We'll get into his book, Male vs. Man, talking about the evolution of manhood. If you haven't already, be sure to subscribe to Forward Thinking on your favorite podcast platform and YouTube. You can also get more information at thepcleague.com/forwardthinking. We hope you enjoy the episode. Welcome back to Forward Thinking. Ricky Vellante, joined by David West, and today we have another special guest, the founder and executive director of Silence the Shame, Shanti Das. Shanti, thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. How y'all doing?
No complaints on this end. So we usually like to start by just having our guests give a little bit about their background, introduce themselves a little bit so our audience knows who you are.
Absolutely. So again, my name is Shanti Das. I'm the founder and executive director of Silence the Shame, which is a mental health nonprofit. And our main mission is to empower and educate communities around mental health and wellness. I started this organization really as a result of a lot of my own mental health challenges. I'll back up a little bit. My dad took his own life when I was probably 7 months old. And we didn't talk about it as a family. He left a wife and 3 kids. I had 2 siblings. My sister passed away last year, but it was tough on us. And we just kind of buried those feelings. Or you know how oftentimes you might compartmentalize your feelings and you only deal with what you need to deal with in the present time. But fast forward, we never properly addressed them as adults. And I started dealing with a lot of anxiety and stress. I worked in a very high-paced industry, the entertainment industry. I was at LaFace Records in the early 90s, hoping to launch the careers of artists like Usher and Outkast and TLC and Toni Braxton, and moved over to Columbia Records. I probably had like a 25-year run in the business and worked at Universal Motown, working with artists like Erykah Badu and Prince and so on. So, I was living out of a suitcase all the time, on and off airplanes, and I just wasn't really dealing with my own emotional health and wellness. And in 2009, I ended up getting diagnosed with cervical spinal stenosis, which really, once we found out, was a direct result of stress. And we oftentimes don't really understand how stress can manifest itself into physical problems. So, it was like the perfect storm with my emotional and physical well-being. So I came back home to Atlanta, started doing a lot of community work. And then in 2014, my best friend took her own life. And I talked to her the day before it happened. And that really put me in a bad place. And for that next year, I kind of went into a downward spiral. Even though I was like a high functioning person that was depressed, I had some serious mental health challenges that I never addressed. And so in September of 2015, I counted up all the pills in my medicine cabinet and I was going to take them. I'm not proud of that moment, but I'm not embarrassed about it either. And I've gotten to a point where my transparency and vulnerability has allowed me to open up and share and help other people. And that's really when I decided to start an organization like Silence the Shame so that I could help erase stigma in our society.
Silence the Shame, tell us a little bit about the programs, specifically what you all are doing in the communities that you're working in, and then also some of the partners. I know we met at All-Star Week. I know you've done some work with the NFLPA. So tell us a little bit about all that as well.
Sure. So one of our main programs is our community conversations platform. And it really is just a fancy title for panel discussions, but we curate these really thoughtful and authentic conversations with clinicians, everyday people with lived experiences, celebrities, influencers, and so forth. And so we've been doing those for about 3 years. We first started with an organization called Jack and Jill of America Incorporated, where we did a 7-city national teen youth summit. around mental wellness. We've also partnered with the AIDS Healthcare Foundation. We've done work with some state agencies in Georgia. And most recently, we were named the mental health charitable partner for the NFL Players Association. Through that partnership, we are doing 1-hour wellness activities. We started in February of this year doing, different things that people can do from a self-care perspective. And so it may be exercise classes or yoga sessions or meditation sessions, any and everything around self-care and wellness. We also have a podcast as well on Google Play, iTunes, and SoundCloud. And we just recently recorded our first one while we've been in quarantine, and it featured our former NFL player, Mohamed Massaquoi.
Here I am in Cleveland. Glad to hear you were able to get him. Yeah, that's fantastic. In going through all of this, usually we talk a little bit about sports, but we do like to have a broader conversation. In working with athletes versus your everyday person, what are some of the similarities and differences in the challenges that they face and the mental health wellness issues that they might deal with?
That's a great question, because just this week, Silence for Shame partnered with the Women's Sports Foundation, and we were able to talk to some Olympic athletes and some collegiate athletes, female athletes, that is. And one thing I realized, whether you're an athlete or an executive or, you're a founder of an organization or you're a healthcare worker, I think the one thing we've learned, especially through COVID-19, is that we all have mental health. We all may not have a mental illness. And I think this quarantine has certainly heightened all of our levels of anxiety. And when you look at the things that we've lost, we talk a lot about grief and loss, and not just the loss of a loved one, but like the loss from a symbolic perspective. Loss of connectivity. Athletes aren't able to get out there and connect with their peers and perform doing something that, they've trained all year for and something that they love. Also loss of finances. You also look at the people who work, at the stadiums and that, move the needle for all of our athletes. They're losing income, and losing the ability to really have their identity, because a lot of us, good or bad, we identify with our jobs. And I just think it's been an interesting time talking to a lot of our athletes. I also started a IG platform called Yeah Wellness, where I do wellness check-ins with celebrities. And I talk to NFL player Takeo Spikes. I talked to Chris Webber from TNT. Same thing, everybody's really just trying to focus on their mind, their body, and their soul. So, I think oftentimes athletes really just focus on the physical part, making sure, that they're in shape and they're ready to go. And not to say that they don't focus on the mental, but I don't know in years past if mental health in the mind was always, top of mind, if you will. We talk about having that mental toughness, but what does that really mean? I think mental toughness more so now than ever is having the vulnerability to be able to talk about when you're having problems, to not be embarrassed. So many of our athletes, I think, tend to shy away from really telling, or spilling the tea, if you will, on what's really going on. And that's not to say you have to tell your story to everybody and get on Instagram or social media platform, but you need to be able to talk to someone. And I'm happy to see that like the NBA and the NFL and so many other sporting organizations are putting mental health, top of mind and front and center. I've also spoken to the staff at the NBA at their home office. I did a talk last week for a community center that Mark Cuban owns. So everybody's calling right now to talk about mental health from the sports community. And we're just thrilled from an advocacy perspective that people are starting to open up. Our hope and goal, quite honestly, Ricky, is that once people start to continue to normalize the conversation, that they take it a step further, though, to get the help that they need, and then to make sure that that help is a part of their lifestyle. There is an attorney that we work with in our organization, Kimberly Haynes, and she represented some players that were going into the NFL draft this year. I was also featured on a podcast that she did the day before with some families and potential players that were going into the draft. And one of the things that I thought was really key when I mentioned to them, how our athletes, you have your team, right? So you have your manager, you have your agent, you have all these people around you. Even some of them have wardrobe stylists now. Why not incorporate that life coach or that therapist, right? Or that psychiatrist, so that they are part of your core team initially before you start making all that money? Because, there are even stressors and mental health challenges that come with finances. So many people really, I think, look to our athletes to support them within their families. And sometimes that can become overwhelming. And again, the need to have to compete every single day. It's just a lot of pressure and stress. So if they start with their therapist in the beginning and that we can map out a plan for wellness, I think our athletes will be more well-rounded.
How critical do you think that piece of individual development is for athletes specifically, now honing in on that? We've talked about this with a number of guests and former athletes that you got to pay attention to the whole person. You can't just pay attention to the physical side of things.
Absolutely. I think it's critical now more so than ever, because the one thing that has happened through COVID-19 is it shows you that, your life can be disrupted at the blink of an eye. And that means that your salary may be put on hold. I think our athletes have to also understand the emotional side of financial stability, being able to save maybe and not spending as much. And again, athletes are human. We often look at them, as our heroes, and we get so excited during, regular season and the playoffs and championships, and we put them up here on this pedestal. But I think sometimes we put unrealistic expectations on them, and we have to understand that, again, that they are human, and we have to allow them to be able to process through their own emotions, acknowledge their emotions and acknowledge their feelings, and have some, critical support so that we can help them get through anything that they may be going through. I mean, you look at these athletes, even from a high school and collegiate perspective, so many of them, their senior year was wiped out. So I just hope that all the athletes are utilizing this time to really look from an introspective perspective and look into their souls and look into their minds and realize what makes them tick. Also identify what else makes them special. I think they have to identify outside of even the role of an athlete, and look at themselves as the role of a human, and what do you want your legacy to be, or what else do you want to do for yourself? You look at someone like a LeBron James, who is now doing a lot in Hollywood. Hopefully some of the athletes are taking the time, during this rest period, if they have any time, to focus on some of their other goals that they want to focus on, things that bring them joy. Because again, if sports is your everything, that's great. Just like me, I love community service, but I also like spending time with my family. I want to write a book. I want to do so many other things. So you got to find and incorporate things that bring you joy, so that you have some other healthy coping mechanisms if that one thing that you look to every single day is kind of taken away at the blink of an eye or put on pause.
Absolutely, yeah. And I mean, the ball stops bouncing, or whatever sport you're playing, at some point for everybody. So, it sounds like the earlier the better. How important do you think it is for not
Can I just add one more thing, not to cut you off?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
One thing too is when you talk to players that have retired, right, and is kind of figuring out what's next in life too. I think, so many of us, we spend time on social media. I like to call Instagram sometimes a highlight reel, and we're looking at other people's lives and livelihood and their lifestyle. And I've seen a lot of players that get depressed too after, life, after basketball or football or baseball or what have you. And they don't really know how to process through those emotions of the transition of life after whatever that sport is. So that's why, again, I feel like there needs to be a strategy not only at the beginning of a player's career, but particularly as players start to transition, into, whether they're legends within their own field or sport, but that they recognize the importance of emotional health and wellness, and that they either have a therapist or have healthy coping mechanisms to get them through that transition.
David, what's your perspective in terms of how these organizations and individuals and the athletes themselves, how open are they to doing exactly that? I mean, you just went through the retirement period yourself.
I think it really comes down to the individual athlete. You got to prepare yourself start preparing before you leave. I mean, that's the biggest key, is to not to think that the NBA or whatever professional sport you're in is going to last forever. That's the most important aspect, at least that I've been able to embrace personally. I want to ask you though, what would be some of the signs for a young guy who may be dealing with, some mental health, maybe not in crisis, but dealing with some different emotional states mentally, more specifically for a young high school, college age player, who may be transitioning into college, transitioning out of college, undergoing a new coaching change, things like that. So I find that players in high school, players in college are the guys that are in my opinion, the most distress, getting a lot of advice from from different areas, not necessarily qualified advice, getting pushed by people for other reasons other than the benefit of the athlete. So what are some of the markers that you would tell a young player to look for, and sort of what are some of the tells that he or she may be giving right now that says, hey, he might be having a bit of a tough time mentally?
So that's a great question. I think one of the things is we oftentimes, when we're getting really stressed out, we don't realize how stress can manifest into physical pressures and issues of something that you may be going through. So, if you're not feeling like yourself, if you're feeling fatigued all the time, if you're working out, but you're still not having that energy that you need every single day to get up and perform at the highest level, if you're angry, right? If you're snapping at your friends, if you find yourself snapping at your coach, at your kids, at your peers, oftentimes that anger is coming from somewhere, right? And so we have to unpack that. So maybe it is that stress that the nation is putting on that student to get into a certain college, or to make it in the draft, or the pressure. We often sometimes see some of our younger athletes, and I'm not speaking from a place of judgment at all, but they may have a child by their childhood sweetheart. So now you add on top of the pressure of, I'm trying to get into a college and play 4 years and then go in the draft, but now I have a young baby. I may not have enough money to raise this child. So I have the pressure of my son or daughter's mother. I have the pressure of my family, who still, even though, I'm the man in high school, so everybody's looking to me to try to drop coins here and there to support everyone. So, when you find like yourself at night staying up late and you kind of can't get out of your thoughts, sweating a lot, I mentioned fatigue. If you start feeling down on yourself all the time and really hopeless, like those are telltale signs that family members need to look out for. Or if that person starts withdrawing from their peers, maybe they're going to practice and doing what they have to do, but they're withdrawing from, outings, hanging out with boys, or, their female friends, or not wanting to go to family functions. If they start speaking out on social media, talking about, sharing some of their most personal feelings, like that's a sign, that they need to really talk to somebody and talk through it. So it really is incumbent upon, the coaches and the family members, and I would say even, fellow teammates, to not be afraid to step up and say something. It's not like you're telling on somebody, right? You're not going to try to go and tell the coach like, yo, so such and such is going through something. I don't think he should be playing this week. But at the same time, you maybe pull that person to the side and say, hey, bro, are you, is it something you want to talk about? Can I help you out? And we know sometimes, sports and entertainment, it's a very ego-driven industry, right? It's very braggadocious in a good way, right? Aspirational. So we don't want to show any sign of weakness, because maybe that'll make us lose our spot, or maybe the coach won't feel like, I'm up to it. But again, now more so than ever, like we have to take this stuff serious, because, we've seen suicide rates on the increase amongst millennials on the, probably in the past 2 decades. And so when someone is not feeling like themselves, or they're acting out, or maybe also, I didn't mention, recreational drugs, whether it's drinking one too many beers or whatever, you may partake in, you can tell when someone doesn't look like themselves and when they're not acting like themselves. And maybe there are some other underlying issues, because, we talk about mental health, right? We all have mental health, but as I mentioned earlier, we may not all have a mental illness. I will say this much. I'm not a clinician, but I certainly, work every day with a lot of clinicians. And I even have a family member that have experienced this. A lot of the serious mental health disorders start rearing their heads between 18 and 24 years old.
Right.
So that's also something important to think about. Like maybe there's something, from a genetic perspective, maybe depression runs in your family, or maybe you have a family member that has suffered from bipolar 1 disorder, or bipolar 2, or schizophrenia. You need to know your family health history as well, I think, as an athlete, because that's important, because it is such a high level and high stress job that you want to make sure if you're susceptible to anything, mental or physical, so that you will know the signs and know how to combat it and treat it, and that there will be an overall plan, like I mentioned, from your team, whether it's your coach, your mom, your agent, everybody that's kind of involved. And so it is a wellness perspective from a physical and mental perspective.
Shanti, my last question, how important do you think it is to have sort of national standards that are adopted, not just by the NBA, NFL, MLB, whatever top tier professional sports league, but also to have high school sports associations, colleges and universities, little leagues, those sorts of things also adopt a standardized process to go about not only education and awareness, but then making the support available.
Again, I think with what we've experienced with COVID-19 and being quarantined, mental health is top of mind for everyone. We certainly need standardized practices and procedures from, I would say even starting in middle school, to high school. I remember last year reading that the state of Florida, New York, and I want to say Virginia implementing classes where each student, 6 through 12, will have to take at a minimum of 5 hours of mental health education per year. I think there's a lot that needs to happen. Again, with the NBA, the NFL, I know the NBA just hired someone to run their wellness division. So they're implementing a lot of practices and procedures. It's catching on, but I think, it needs to come from the top down. I would like to see even our, elected officials focus on mental health even more. I think there's a lot of work that needs to be done in individual states. The one thing that frustrated me is there is a lack of mental health funding for a lot of our states. And so if, our athletes or even everyday people, continue to normalize the conversation and they want to get the help, we need to make sure that we have the resources, from a national and global perspective to have these outpatient facilities that can really be exactly what the community needs them to be. And I think there even needs to be, special programs put in place for athletes so that people can understand the sensitivities of what the athletes experience. Again, not that they're any different than anyone, but it's a different level of pressure and stress. And so sometimes we need to have facilities that cater, right, to certain businesses and certain industries. So I just hope that as we continue to move this conversation forward, yes, this is the month of May, it's Mental Health Awareness Month, but June is PTSD Awareness Month. July is Minority Mental Health Awareness Month. September is Suicide Prevention Awareness Month. October is World Mental Health Day. Let's keep this conversation going. Let's really support our athletes and uplift them. And, we did a campaign for May 5th. We have our own day. May 5th is National Silence the Shame Day, and we had several athletes posting about it. But I want more, I want more people to talk about it. I want more people to open up. That's not to say you don't have to share your own story, but I can guarantee you that if you're an athlete or a politician or whatever, everybody has someone in their family that have experienced a mental illness. So we have to keep this conversation going so that I think these organizations and these institutions realize, the importance of standardized procedures so that we can move from a place of wellness, again, as I mentioned, mind, body, and soul.
We really appreciate the time. This is a great conversation. Shanti, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. And I'd just like to add, if you guys want to learn more about Silence the Shame, please visit our website, silencetheshame.com. As I mentioned, we also have a podcast with over 30 episodes. You can find it under Silence the Shame at iTunes, Google Play, and SoundCloud. Also on YouTube, we have several panel discussions. I forgot to mention, we did a panel discussion in November with the Atlanta Hawks basketball team, and it was Silence the Shame night at State Farm Arena. And it was so well received that now the Hawks want to do more with us. And so we're in talks with some other teams in the league. So take a look at that panel. I think it'll be really helpful. And if you are suffering or if you don't have the courage to reach out, there's a great organization called the Crisis Text Line Organization. It's confidential. It's 24 hours a day. It's 7 days a week. You can text the word silence to 741-741. You can immediately be connected to a counselor. It's not in lieu of therapy, but it can certainly help de-escalate a crisis. And then just a few quick other websites. NAMI.org, NAMI.org is a great place if you want to find a therapist. You can go on, put in your website. Most clinicians are doing telehealth services and virtual services now. Also, psychologytoday.com is another great place to find a therapist, or betterhelp.com. And then I also, in my conversations, have learned that a lot of athletes are getting into mindfulness and meditation. So there's some really amazing meditation apps. A couple that come to mind are Headspace, Calm, Insight Timer, and Smiling Mind. And most of them right now are offering free trials. So you got to start somewhere. You got to exercise and get your endorphins going, keep yourself in a better mood. Maybe do some yoga, do some stretching every day, take regular breaks, eliminate stressful people from your life, prioritize your relationships, and really try to find trustworthy and empathetic and understanding people in your circle that won't judge you for whatever you're going through, and just do whatever you can to continue to silence the shame.
Well, we really appreciate it, Shanti.
Thank you guys for having me.
and welcome back to Forward Thinking. We're now joined by Emmy-nominated actor, father, husband, and author with his latest book, Male vs. Man, that we're going to get into in a bit, Dondré Whitfield. Dondré, thank you for joining us.
Brother Ricky, my pleasure. Brother David, my pleasure, man. Honored to be here.
Thank you for joining us, man.
Yes, sir.
Yeah. Just to kick things off first, how about you give us a little bit of your background, introduce yourself to our audience?
Well, my name is Dondré Whitfield. I've been an actor in the industry for over 35 years, stage, film, and television. My first job on the national stage was on The Cosby Show, which was a pretty powerful launch to a pretty storied career. My last job, Queen Sugar, was a phenomenal drama about the comeuppance in the South for Black people. So another pretty powerful piece. And so those two powerful works sort of bookend this 35-year career as an actor. But as I often tell, folks, acting is my passion, but activation is my purpose. And my activation comes from me being a counselor and getting people to come to their best selves, me restoring and trying to resuscitate our brothers to help them matriculate into their manhood. And I never thought that I would ever write a book, but because of my commitment to walking out my purpose, my godly purpose, I knew that I had to write a book. It was the scariest thing I've ever done because of some messaging that I got when I was in the fourth grade by a teacher who told me I wasn't a good writer. But thank God I got to this space of moving through that, because that messaging became the infomercial of my life about who I was as a writer. And now that I've broken the shackle of that, me thinking that I would never even write one book, now I feel like there's at least 5 inside of it.
Right.
And so every day, my job as a man is to continue to grow myself in order to facilitate the growth of others.
And before jumping into Male versus Man, what was it beyond that it's inspired you to take that step, overcome that experience in the fourth grade to say, I'm going to pick up a pen or type and I'm going to start writing?
Such a good question. My father and I were estranged from each other for 20 years. At the age of 26, just to give people who might be aware of my career, at that time, I was doing a show called All My Children. I, bought a house for myself, first one in the family, with the car and house, pool, garage, all that kind of stuff, the quote unquote American type dream. And big me was trying to speak for little me. And I went back into Brooklyn and I found my father. My father was in and out of jail my entire life. My father was a street hustler. Age of 6, kidnapped me from my mother. I only had a few encounters with my father. And so this 26-year-old version of myself still sort of really walking in the space of maleness, and we'll get into the messaging of the book in a second, but walking in this space of maleness, I decided that I was going to go and tell my father what I thought. And here I am in this brand new, Lexus coupe, one of the one of the 4 out of all of New York, right? And so now I'm gonna make my father feel as bad as I felt my entire life. And I told my father, and I can't say what I said because I don't speak that way now, because that's not a part of the languaging of my life now. But the gist of it was that if I saw him again, somebody was going to die and it wasn't going to be me. And that was, again, the big version of me speaking for the little version of me that was really broken.
Right.
By not having my father in my life and missing out on manhood messaging that I needed. And so subsequently, 20 years went by. And my daughter, who at that time was 11 years old, came and sat next to me on the couch and she said, "Dad, do you know where your father is?" And that question devastated me, because I knew that no matter what I was going to tell her, it wasn't going to be good enough. It wasn't going to be a good enough reason why my father and I were not connected. And all the things that I teach her and my son, to be forgiving, to be human beings that have empathy and give grace to people. I realized that I was teaching them, give all those things to everybody except one person who you deem unworthy. what finally got me to the other side of that was realizing that my father couldn't father me because he himself was unfathered. And I knew it wasn't about me being a son to my father because I was 46 years old and I really didn't need a dad in that way. But as a godly man, it was now my responsibility to be a brother to my father and to give him the grace that society never gave him. And to understand, not to look at my father as the 70-year-old version of himself, but the 7-year-old version of himself that never got what he needed in order for him to grow into the man that he needed to become for himself and ultimately to be the father that I needed him to be for me. Man, in me thinking about this book, I decided to write a playbook for manhood that my father would have needed in order for him to matriculate into his own manhood. All of us, Dave, I use this example all the time when I talk to young brothers about the importance of this. Say, name me your favorite basketball players. And no matter who they name, and I'm sure that you will identify with this, the reason why you became the great player that you were was because of the information and the coaching you received. Since AAU, high school, college, the pros, and watch this, the higher you get in the platform that you have, you don't get less coaching, you got more. You might have a shooting coach, you might have a strength and conditioning coach, you might have a mental coach, you might have a nutritionist, which is a food coach. So you got more coaching because there's more at stake.
Right.
So if we know that it's a requirement for you to have great coaching in order for you to become a great player, why don't we think we need great coaching in order to become a great man? So when I decided to write this book, I decided to write a book that would give great coaching to my father when he needed it most in his life. And if I weren't here to coach my son as an 11-year-old boy, what kind of playbook would he need in order for him to come into his manhood? In order for him to have access to great coaching. That's why I wrote this book.
That's a powerful statement you made there. How do you know, you talked about that moment in 4th grade where someone disparaged you. So how do you know that was the point? Like what made you recognize or reflect and say, this is the moment that I was discouraged? And then how did you go back and confront that?
Man, David, that's such a great question, brother. I'm a sports guy, so I played semi-pro in 3 different sports: baseball, basketball, and football. So I see, like many guys, I see life through the lens of sports.
Right.
So if you had a bad game last night, if somebody, not this happened often to you, but if somebody cooked you one night for 35, 40, you might go back and do what? You might go back and look at some footage.
Right.
You might go back and look at what happened. Wow, okay, my footwork was, I need to overplay him a little bit to his left. I need to make him go to his offhand. I might have to take that. I'm going to give him the 20-footer, but I'm not going to let him get to the rack. Right? So you go back and you look at that. Why? Because you're getting ready to play him soon again. And your job is to make sure that you don't show up as the same David West that was in that game in the next game. And for me, every single day of my life is like that. My wife is in bed. My children are in bed. I go sit in my favorite quiet place in the house and I go over the footage of my day. The first thing I do is affirm myself. Okay, yeah, that was good. Yeah, that was good. The way you did that was awesome. Because affirmation is the greatest gift that you can give yourself or anyone. So the first thing I do is I affirm myself. The second thing I do is do the work that champions have to do. You know this. You got to be in a position where you do the things that most people don't want to do because they're painful. You got to examine yourself. And you got to say, hey, man, this is not good. We got to make this better ASAP. And so I sit there and I examine the things that I don't think that I did well. And so to answer your question, I got to that moment in my life of rewinding all the way back to that tape because I couldn't understand. I kept, as a speaker, as a counselor, people kept telling me, man, your messaging is great. You got to write a book. And I said,
Right.
no, I don't think I'm going to,
Right.
I think I'll just do it through the messaging. I'll just speak
Right.
it. I don't need to write a book. I don't need to, no, man. You need to write a book. You are an authority, but you will never become an expert. Society will never deem you as an expert, as an authority, until you write a book. And I was going, no, I was fighting this thing, David. I was fighting this tooth and nail, brother. And I finally sat down with myself and I was like, bro,
Right.
what's going on with you? Right. It's not like you don't have an education. It's not like people haven't told you. Your wife tells you every single day what a great writer you are. You write speeches for people. You write proposals. You write all of these things. People are telling you what a phenomenal storyteller you are in your writing. Why do you not want to write a book? And I got quiet and I kept going over the footage of my life until I got to that seminal moment. It was like all of a sudden, oh, there it is. Right. Play that. And I'm sitting there and I'm looking at it and I'm hearing her words. I'm hearing what was happening to my body. I'm feeling what was happening to my mind. And then subsequently, how that became the narrative of my life as a writer. And I said, oh, now you got to write a book.
Right.
Now you got to do it because this is the way to resuscitate and restore yourself.
Wow.
To come to a space of wholeness. That's how.
And so now you get the pen out, or again, you type, depending on whatever your methodology is, and you start to write Male versus Man. So tell us a little bit about the book, what it's about, and the messaging. So in the book, so to your point, I've always been, my mother was very hard on me as a writer, right? So my penmanship, you know, my mother was the kind of mom that, like, if you did your homework and it wasn't neat enough, you do the whole thing again. So when I write, people often have said, who wrote this? And I said, well, I did. I even write in calligraphy. Like, I love writing. Like, it's something really cathartic about creating not just a story on the paper, but the art of the way it looks on the paper. Like, I take great pride in it. So at first, I started writing it by hand till I quickly began to realize, hey, man, this is ridiculous. So you just gonna walk around with, like, you know, paper like everywhere, like a mad scientist, and you're like, no, man, this is ridiculous. You have to come into the 20th century and you have to use resources. You have access to them, right? These are the kinds of things that people do when they don't have access. Come on, man. So when I finally started pecking away, you know, one finger on each hand, because I don't know how to type. So literally, I just started pecking away. And the book wrote itself because the messaging was bursting, like it was dying to come out of me. I wrote this book in a matter of months. The idea of the messaging behind Male versus Man is this: males look to be served while men look to be of service.
That's a powerful statement.
Don't ever call me a male. I already know that. The only thing that's required of me to be a male is to have a penis and a pulse. That's it.
Right.
That's it. So if you're alive and you got one of these, welcome to the club. You didn't have to do nothing to do that. But in order to be a man, you got to have purpose and precision. Your purpose is to serve the women and children in your life, not just in your house, but everywhere. That's your purpose. The precision is about how well you do that. In this book, it breaks down the fact that as a male is the anatomy or the gender that I was chosen to be, right? So male was the gender that I was chosen to be, but man is the job that I choose to do. The reason why men are having a really tough time in society right now in terms of the way we're seen is because our society doesn't know that there's a difference between males and men. And males are making more noise than men.
And the men, right.
So let me give you an example. If a guy abuses a woman on any level, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, physically, they will say, I can't believe that man did that. If a male abuses a child or children, everybody says, I can't believe that man did that. But if you and I, as family men, as devoted men, right, devoted and committed toward building those around us, when we do what we do, they go, wow, that's a good man. How are you going to possibly give me the same title that you give those two that are really just simply functioning as grown males, so their bodies grew, but really they're stuck in the mental capacity of a boy? How can you possibly give me the same title? I'm offended that you give me the same title that you give them.
Wow.
Man is a title that you earn. Man is a brand. Hey, look, man, if man was a brand, nobody would buy us right now because everybody has us mistaken for males. So think of it like this. If I said, hey, Dave, we're going to throw you a party. Dave, what's your favorite drink? And you would say what?
Crown Royal.
Crown Royal. So we go and you sit there and we put. Big time. So we sit there and okay. So let's make it even safer. What's your favorite soft drink?
Lemonade.
Lemonade. So I say okay, boom, and then we go and we get some lemonade, right? And let's say we go get some Minute Maid lemonade. Another advertisement. Okay, so now we sit there. I go get some lemonade, right? And I look, and boy, lemonade is that Minute Maid lemonade is super expensive.
Right.
So I go and I buy this off-brand lemonade, and I put it in this punch bowl. And you go over and you're like, yeah, I'm about to give me some lemonade. You go, you take you a sip. You're like, oh, Dondré, what is this? This is disgusting. I'm like, bro, that's lemonade. You're like, is it Minute Maid lemonade? And I said, no, this is like a brick, but lemonade is lemonade, right? No, sir. It's a proprietary blend. It's different than just, it ain't just any old lemonade. This is a brand. Male is the off-brand version of what man is. Man is a proprietary blend of male that seeks to serve those around him. Don't ever just call me a male. I'm a man. Don't ever just give out my title of man to somebody because they hit a milestone age, 18, 21. Car companies think the magic age is 25, right? I can show you some brothers who are just grown males who are in their 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s.
Absolutely.
That's why this messaging in this book is so important, because we got to begin to separate ourselves from our male counterparts.
Now, do we take on an adversarial role, a position against them? What's the position that you take?
Those are our brothers. They could have otherwise matriculated into their manhood if they had what? Instruction and coaching.
Right.
It's just like a brother who, like, look, if this brother's, he's shooting around and he's shooting volleyball style, two hands, which is the most awful.
Right.
Right. I can't even watch it. Like, I've coached my kids' teams. Even when I see kids on the street, I have done this, David. I'll see a kid shooting like that, and they'll be by themselves, and I'll be like, whoa.
Right.
You don't know me. You can call me Uncle Dre. Listen, here's what we need to do. What's your dominant hand? Right hand. Okay, great. Put that ball in your hand. Put it by your shoulder like a waiter. Here's what we go. Don't touch it with the left hand. Just go just like that. Two fingers straight towards the basket. Here we go. Here we go. Here we go. And then leave your hand inside the cookie jar. Leave it in the cookie. There we go. There we go. Inside of 10 minutes, I have created a shooter.
Right.
Why? Instruction, coaching, information, coaching. The same thing that I do with the kid like that is the same thing that we got to do with our male brothers, and say, hey, brother, listen, I understand how difficult this is. I was once asked, what's the greatest role you've ever played in your life?
Mm.
And I thought about that for a second. And then I said, the role of a man. And the interviewer said, what movie was that? And I said, no. This isn't a character.
Right.
I'm talking about the role that I play as a man every day. It is the hardest job that I'm ever going to do in my life because people expect something of me. They expect something great of me. They expect safety from me. I'm supposed to be covering the women and children in my life. I'm supposed to be covering society. So now I'm sitting here and I'm going, I know that I never could have gotten to this space had I not had information and coaching. So our job with our male counterparts is to say, listen, I know the struggles of this. I know what this is. I've been in this position. And I want you to know that as a brother, I'm here when you need me. I'm here when you want this elevation because I can see it in you. And the only thing that you're missing right now is a little bit of information and a little bit of instruction.
And how do you?
I'm here for you.
Right, and so I haven't seen your book, but I'm going to grab one because
I love it, bro.
Again, and so I would say, what are the steps that we take to start those conversations? Is there a process that you've developed in having those conversations?
Definitely, because to your point, what we don't want to do is appear adversarial. Right. I want you to know that you have an advocate and not an adversary. So the way to finding or the pathway forward to giving them advocacy is for them to not even know that they're getting it. So my wife wanted my children to eat cauliflower one day, right? Kids did not want to eat it. What she began to do was she began to whip up the cauliflower so it had the consistency of mashed potatoes.
Right.
She began to dress it up like it was mashed potatoes. Pretty soon, kids are sitting there, they're eating it. Hey, party over here, mashed potatoes. They got no idea they're eating cauliflower. To that point, we have to begin to have conversations with our male brothers and just begin to talk about the things. I always talk about my failures in life. So whenever I feel like I see a brother who's struggling at something specific, what I begin to do is I begin to talk about my shortcomings that were in that area and how I found my way to the other side. Because now I'm feeding them cauliflower while it feels like they're getting mashed potatoes. I'm giving them nutrients without them even knowing that they're getting it, just like my kids got, right? So I'm feeding them the messaging that they need without them feeling like I'm fixing them. I'm just talking about how I fix myself. And so now I give them the cheat code. Now they walk away empowered because they have the information now to get to the other side without feeling like another one of their brothers said, man, you got a problem. Here's what you got to do. Most of our brothers will never going to receive that messaging. So what we got to do is dress it up. We got to give them cauliflower while it feels like they're getting mashed potatoes. Give them the nutrients without them know that they're even being fed that in the first place.
Now, we've been talking about it, as you mentioned, the sort of lens of sports. I'm also curious as to the lens of your acting career and storytelling career, how that also influenced your ability to write the book.
Well, being an actor is being a storyteller just with someone else's words. I can do that all day long. What was surprising was at first it became challenging to even feel like once I knew that I had the pressure of telling my own stories, all of a sudden I had none. I was like, what's going on here? And I think that was my first bout with writer's block. But it was the pressure of, it was the first time using, the sports analogies. It was the first time, look, when you're playing out on the street, nobody really has there's no real great expectation, right?
Right.
Well, now all of a sudden, when you're on the main stage, on the platform, you got that logo in the middle, of the court, lights, people paid to come and see.
Right.
Now, you being able to pop 20 footers all day, now all of a sudden, it's like your arm don't work, your fingers, you
Right.
don't know how to hold the ball, your elbow is sticking out, your shot putting. What's going on here? Right?
Right.
And that becomes a function of realizing, okay, it's not about the fact that I don't know what I'm doing. It's about the fact that my platform has changed.
Mm.
And because I'm focusing on the gravity of the platform, I'm now forgetting who I am as a player.
Mm.
Now what I got to do is stop thinking about that and focusing on who I am and what I do.
Mm.
And that will come. As soon as I forget about all that's happening around me and just focus on what I know how to do, it brings to mind another example. My daughter, when she was 6 years old, we were in the Caribbean and having, family vacation. And before we went on the vacation, I was teaching my daughter in our pool how to snorkel. So she became proficient. We did it every day, right? So much fun. She was like, yeah, Dad. Okay. So now we're on this boat. It's taking us to a great shallow piece of water, but had great, reefs and coral and all that, so that, you could just be wowed and amazed, right? So we're on this boat and I'm telling my daughter, I said, listen to me, whatever happens, don't panic. And she said to me, Daddy, what is panic? And I knew I had to figure out a way to give her something rudimentary enough that she could understand it and immediately apply it. So I thought about it and I said, Parker, panic is what people will do that makes them stop doing what they know how to do. So if let's say water gets into my mask, I will now begin to fester and think about the water being in the mask. And now I'm thinking about panic. I'm thinking about that instead of focusing on what I know how to do, which is swim. If I keep focusing on the thing, I will stop doing what I know how to do. If I'm just focusing on the water, if I'm just focusing on the mask, if I'm focusing on drowning, I'm going to drown. But if I focus on doing what I know how to do, which is swim, everything is going to be just fine. Right? So again, I had to begin to focus on doing what I know how to do. I know how to tell stories. Okay, well, what's my story? The story of male versus man is about me and how I came into my manhood. Okay, well, then tell that story. Why else do you want to write this book? I want to write this book because if my father had this messaging, then he would have become a great man. Okay, well, then tell that story. And then before I knew it, instead of focusing on, oh my gosh, I'm writing a book, and oh my gosh, all these people are expecting me to write this great book, I just began to focus on my experience and just being myself. We talked about this before we even started it. Just being yourself. Many of us feel like being ourselves isn't good enough.
Right.
It is. It is. Just focus on self. So once I began focusing on self, the book just started pouring out.
That's a great story. How do you deal with perspective? What's the importance if you're talking to let's say you're talking to a 16 to 22-year-old kid, talking specifically to an athlete, but one of the things that I think is important for athletes is to have proper perspective. And from what you've laid out so far, you have a wide perspective, a broad perspective. You're able to, I picked up on it, right? Your ability to interweave stories and talk about your family. So how important is it for perspective, but also the growth? So you start with a perspective, but then how important is the overall growth of your perspective?
So what's interesting about perspective is that that can come from two places. Your perspective can come from your perception, or your perspective can come from reality. Here's what's tricky about that. If you subscribe to your perception for too long, it will become reality.
Right.
So watch this. If the three of us, you, Ricky, and myself, look at an accident that happens in the street, we might get 3 different stories based on what our perception of that accident was. That perception will come from our perspective. So if, David, you turned first and you saw the accident happen before I decided to turn, and then Ricky came and he turned after I turned, there are going to be 3 different perceptions based on 3 different perspectives. But there's also room for reality. You saw a version of the accident. I saw a version of the accident. Ricky saw a version of the accident. And there's also the reality of what actually happened. Based on the time that I turned around, I might have missed the fact that car number 1 ran the light and hit car number 2. So I would say it was the fault of car number 2. But I completely missed the part that car number 1 actually ran the light. So all of that to say that those things can become very tricky. Our job every day is to figure out, okay, whoa, what is this? What is this that I'm feeling? Is this just my perception of what's happening, or is it reality? So am I really a good shooter, or is this just my perception based on the fact that I'm the best shooter in my house?
Right. Right. Exactly.
You feel me?
Exactly.
So my perception is that because I outshoot my dad, and my dad is not a great shooter, my perception is I'm a good shooter. Why? Because in my house, I'm the best shooter. That's my perception. But the reality of it is I'm not really a great shooter. I took 40 shots and I made 10, but my dad only made 8. So in comparison, my perception is I'm a good shooter.
Right.
So our job every day is to figure out, am I operating from a space of my perception, or am I operating from a space of what reality really is?
Right.
And I want to keep operating off the space of what reality is, because that's how I grow myself, not out of my perception. Because if I operate out of my perception and I just beat dad, he made 8 shots, I made 10. Well, I'm a great shooter. Guess what? I don't have to shoot anymore. Why? Because I'm a great shooter. I just beat my dad. The reality of it is I'm not a great shooter, and I have to keep practicing in order to facilitate what? My growth.
Growth, right.
I can't grow if I'm drowning in my perceptions, which are inaccurate.
Right.
If I find out what reality is, that will usher me into the space of my growth.
Good deal.
I think you just laid out the problem with like 90% of society right now.
Yes. Yes.
But how important is it, as we transition from that idea of growth to looking inside of what you're accepting sort of the reality? How does a young athlete accept what they are? Because a lot of times we say, hey man, you got room to grow, you can improve. We're always sort of throwing the olive branch to a guy. But what point, right? What does that look like for a young person to accept what they are and still be positive and upbeat about that? So what does that look like?
So the positivity gets back to what I was mentioning earlier, which is going over the tape of my life, affirming the things that I do well, but wanting to see the things that I don't do well. Because the nature of finding the things that I don't do well will lead to my ultimate growth and my expansion. I can't grow simply affirming myself all day about what I do well. Because if I just completely sit down and affirm what I do well, I don't have to do any of that because I already do that well, right? So I just sit back and I watch myself do well in my mind. But really, every great person who's ever done anything profound in life has gotten there as a function of uncovering what they don't do well in order to get better at that. So if you don't have a great left hand, you don't practice shots with your right hand because you're already pretty proficient with your right hand. If you don't begin to over and over drill yourself at making shots with your left hand, you never grow. Every great player in this game, and you know this, in the NBA, that's the highest space of competition. If you cooked an entire league over doing what you do, guess what? The league is about making adjustments.
Right.
The league is going to make an adjustment. So if this is what you do well, the next time they see you, they're going to take, if they're smart, they're going to take that away from you.
Right.
So now if they take that away from you, now what? How do you still get 30 after they took away what you do best? So now the function of who I become as a player is every summer, what do? I add something to my arsenal.
Right.
Oh, you took that away from me? Guess what you did? Whoa, what was that? Yeah,
Right.
that's called summer.
Right.
That's what I've been doing all summer. And you ain't ready for that. Why? Because you weren't in the gym with me.
Right.
I did that all summer just to show up. And guess what? I'm going to bring something else into the playoffs too.
Right.
Right? Why? Because that's the function of me growing myself in order for me to be better prepared for the battle that's going to ensue in a minute.
Right.
So every single day, I tell all these young brothers, hey, listen, the best players that you've ever seen, your best players, all the people that are up on your wall, they look to see what they're not good at.
Mm.
They look to find out what they're not good at. They accept the fact that they're not good at it, and then it becomes unacceptable to them being not good at that.
Right.
And now they're starving to make sure that they create a better version of themselves. So I would just literally have a conversation with a young brother and go, hey, listen, the key to your growth, the key to you becoming a great player is constantly uncovering what you are not great at.
Yeah, that's fire.
And then work, period. And then working at becoming great at that. That's how you make yourself greater, by discovering what you're not great at.
Right. That's a word, bro. That's another powerful message for the young. Now I'm saying, I mean, I work with a lot of young guys. I'm constantly on the phone with these guys. These 16 to 22-year-old guys, man, they are some of the most vulnerable people. You know what I'm saying? Even more so than the younger kids. I mean, vulnerable. So any of this messaging, man, is important for them to hear, you know, and I definitely know it's going to reverberate.
Here's why. That age, think about this for a second. So every time I've coached my son's teams, whether it's baseball or basketball, every mom on that team says to me at some point, she says, what's wrong with my son?
Right.
What is wrong with my son?
Right.
And I always say, nothing. He's a boy.
Right.
He's wired completely different than you. Let me break it down. I told you I got a daughter and a son. The difference between a girl and a boy is this. If I made a fire in the middle of this room and I put broken glass, nails, hellfire, damnation, just like right in the middle of this floor, the girl would say, oh my gosh, that looks dangerous. I better stay away from that. The boy would go, oh my gosh, that looks dangerous. Check this out.
Right.
That's the difference between girls and boys. We were created to be warriors. We were created to be hunters, right? Before we were in a civilized society, before we had grocery stores, before we had places where you could just go in and grab a meal, we would have to, without sneakers on our feet, without Nikes, we would have to fashion a weapon out of a stick and a stone and kill an animal sometimes 3 times, 4 times, 5 times, 6 times greater than our own size and think, I'm going to make it. I'm not going to die. I'm going to be okay. We have that as a function of who we are as hunters. But guess what the cruel fate was for us? We came into a civilized society where being a hunter now, there's something wrong with you. So you're still wired the same way. You still have the DNA of a hunter. You still have the DNA of a warrior, but no one ever taught you what to do with all of that in this civilized society. So now when a young male between the ages of 16 and 22 acts like what they're wired to be, something's wrong with them. And we got to put them away. Why? Because they're dangerous.
Right.
No, they're not. They're dangerous because they haven't had information and instruction. Here's who you are, young brother. You're wired to be this.
Right.
I'm going to teach you how to harness that warrior. how to harness that hunter, and then unleash him when the time is appropriate. It's not appropriate for you to unleash him during a prom dance. It's not appropriate. It's not appropriate for you to unleash him during church. It's not appropriate for you to unleash him when you've got little kids around you, when you've got elderly around you, when you've got women around you who are looking for you to serve as a function of your covering. That's not appropriate. Here's when it's appropriate. Here's how it's appropriate. Now, go be all the warrior and the hunter that you want to be. Here. Okay, we done? We done. When we walk outside this door, we're no longer hunter and warrior. We are covering. You got to be able to flip the switch. But without that kind of information and coaching, without that kind of information and instruction, those brothers from the age of 16 and 22 will be a menace to society. And that's why they feel so confused, because they know that something is happening to their body. Something is happening to their mentality. They don't know what to do with all of that. And then they have one of these. And this is giving them false instruction. This is saying, yeah, do all of those things. Be a hunter. Grab somebody's behind. Be all of those, because that's what you do. Go wear some bling bling. Do all of that stuff. Yeah. And then they go and they do that. And then society demonizes them and vilifies them, right? And says, what's wrong with you? And you're like, but this is what I feel innately in me right now. And this is instructing me to do all of that. Now you're going to penalize me for that? Yeah, because they haven't had the proper information and instruction.
Wow.
Never met a bad kid.
Right.
Never met a bad kid.
Right.
I've only met kids that have had bad instruction, that have bad information. I've never met a bad kid.
Right. It goes back to perception versus reality, too, of getting sucked into that perceived reality, which isn't actually reality.
Yes. And guess what? How about the perception of who you are is bad because somebody else told you that?
Right.
And you are a bad kid. Somebody need to lock you up. I swear, if I was younger, I would kick you. Something is wrong with you. And I think something is wrong with you. What is wrong with you? All that stuff becomes the infomercial of your life. And eventually you begin to live up to what you listen to. So if you keep hearing that you're a bad kid, if you keep hearing that something is wrong with you, if you keep hearing that you need to be put away, if you keep hearing that you're unworthy of love, if you're unworthy of all of these things, you will begin to live up to that. And actually, that becomes the way that you seek attention. It becomes a skill set, being bad. That boy Bradley, something wrong with him. He's bad. Yeah, boy, I don't know what's wrong with you. Now that becomes a function of the way I get attention, even if it's bad attention. I'd rather get bad attention than no attention. Being abused is a terrible thing, but I'm going to tell you the worst abuse at all is neglect. The worst abuse is neglect. Watch this. I'll prove it to you. When they put bad people away, quote unquote, in our society, where they put them? They put them in jail. They take away your community. They put you away. What the corrections institution has realized is, wow, these people that we put away, even though they're imprisoned, they created their own community because they created gangs. So now, as a function of us being communal beings, when we were taken away from our original community, we made another community inside of jail. We created a gang. So that's our community. Okay, when they really want to punish you, what do? They put you in solitary care confinement. Right. Why? Because we are communal beings. We need community. So solitary confinement is a function of what? Neglect. Somebody left you there. Somebody chose not to deal with you at all. Yeah, being abused emotionally, spiritually, physically, all of those things, terrible. But the worst offense is the one of neglect, because we are communal beings. So we would rather have bad attention than no attention. Right. Because at the very least, at least I'm dealing with somebody. At least somebody is dealing with me. At least somebody is recognizing me. Even though they're saying that Bradley is bad, they're saying Bradley instead of not saying my name at all.
In terms of perception versus reality,
Mm-hmm.
how important, coming from your industry, is it that representation and this movement towards more representation within film, how important is that so that people can see the positive stories being told on that front versus some of the more reduced ways that people of color have been represented within film and television?
Most of the ways that we're put in a deficit based on the images that we see in film and television. Look, I mean, it's so, all you need to do is look at any of the movies that are telling stories about both men and women and see the stories that are being told about the women, and then look at the stories that are being told about the men. Even when you look at, like, I just, I as a function of me going mad, I created a television show, a half-hour comedy, family comedy that I don't feel like exists right now. We came up with television shows like, for me, started, I'm dating myself, but Brady Bunch, and and then moving to 8 is Enough, and then moving to shows like Family Ties and The Cosby Show, Family, all those kinds of shows where there were great men under a roof that honored their wives and built their children. And you still found a way to laugh at all of that happening. Now what we're seeing is a function of all of the men. And you can name any of the shows that you want. Feel free to find one that doesn't do this. Don't worry, I'll give you plenty of time to come up with one. All the television shows that we see now where the husband, the father, is really an extension of the kids. He's somebody who needs to be managed just like the kids. In fact, the kids are actually managing the father. Dad, again? Dad, why would you do that? Dad, you gotta do better. Oh my gosh, Dad, I feel so terrible for you. Like, this is the messaging that we are seeing every single day on film and on television about who men are. And that's because society has men confused with males. As a husband, as a father, you couldn't get me to do any of those things that you see these clowns on television doing. I know a whole bunch of men that don't come close to doing all those things, but none of those men are being represented on television. That's why this messaging is so important, because we need separation. We need to have our brand recognized as something different than the brand of males. Simple.
Let me give you my last two. You touched on it a little bit, but you didn't go. But usually I like to ask these two questions. The first one is, you've had some success in your life. You've been successful. You have a book. You have a family. You're proud of what you've become. Where was your fail up moment? Where was that point where something didn't go the way you wanted it to? You didn't get the outcome you wanted, but you used that moment to trigger you a different direction. Where was that moment?
Such a great question. So I was in a relationship with a young lady in my 20s, and I cheated on her. And I thought I was committed. I loved her. I didn't even understand why I did it. And I will never forget how that made me feel. Most women think that guys don't care when they cheat. They go, oh, he doesn't care. He doesn't care. But that is absolutely not true. Most of the time, that brother's not going to tell you that he cares because he has to appear stoic. Because somehow he thinks that's a measure of what his manhood is. But if he were to be honest with you, he would tell you how horrible he feels because he failed at something. And we hate failing. I will never forget how I felt in that moment. And I began doing exactly what I told you I do. I started going back in my tapes. At the age of 12 or 13 years old, I was in the car with my father. My father drove, again, I told you, my father was a street hustler.
Right.
And he drove this car I'm dating myself again. It's awful. So this Lincoln Mark V. It's got this cutout in the back. You know, the tire cut out in the back. Ugh,
Yes.
killer. The coldest thing on the street. And everybody's looking at like, oh, look at Dre. And he's with his dad. Yeah. And I'll never forget how good that made me feel, right? And so we stop at this light. And my father turns to me and we got sunroof is open, and the windows are down, and, you know, everybody's looking. And I got my arm up on, you know, I could barely, I'm still little, so I got my elbow up here, you know, I can't even, you know, it's awkward, but it just made me feel like I was more like a dude, like a man, you know. So I have my elbow up here, and my father looks over and he says, I love your mother, and I would do anything for her. Man, that made me feel so good, man. I was like, wow, because all a child ever wants to hear is how his parents love each other. Right? In the very next moment, almost without pause, my father looks out of the driver's side window and screams out to a girl across the street, catcalling. Now, while he didn't tell me, the messaging that I got from that was, you can love one woman and lust after many. That started my trajectory as a cheater. Because in that moment, I was saying, look, every son wants to be like his father until he begins to decide, no, I think I need to do something different.
Right.
In that moment, I was going, I want to be like my father. If this behavior is good enough for my father, it's got to be good enough for me. That set my trajectory as a cheater. Here's why it was so profound. I didn't know it. I had no idea. It wasn't a conscious thing that I was telling myself, all right, well, time to get my cheat on. I just got that messaging and it just got into my skin. It came into my pores. So as a function of me walking out my relationship, it just came out because it was already embedded in me.
Right.
It became a part of my coding. That moment, finding that moment, Brother David, it was the most devastating thing, but it was the best thing at the same time because it gave me awareness of who I was truly. Who am I truly? And Michelle Obama wrote a book called Becoming. What she doesn't say in that book, or what they don't really touch on about that book, is in order for you to become something, you have to unbecome what's unbecoming of you. In order for you to become, you have to unbecome first. So in other words, you have to gain a consciousness of who you are, say that, that's unbecoming, then have a consciousness of what you want to become, and then go about unbecoming what you are in order to become what you want to be. Once I realized that I was a cheater, once I realized that I was not the man that I thought that I was, my perception, not reality, I had to unbecome that in order to become what I wanted to become. Man, that was everything. That activated me to come to matriculate into a higher space of manhood, man. That was that defining moment. Like, yeah, man, you got to get it together. There's a lot of stuff you're missing.
Right.
Then that was it. That was like, okay, now I'm hungry. Now I'm looking around for anything that will elevate me. And that's what got me to this place.
Right. Good deal. That's a critical part, I think, for a lot of people as they're on their journey, is knowing that you have this moment where things are just not going to go right. You're going to slip up, but you use that moment to be a catalyst into something better in your future.
Totally.
Man.
Totally.
So the last thing I've got for you, man, and it's real light, but your morning routine. What could you share with us? I think getting your morning started is an important part of everyone's day, and I know a lot of people have a lot of different routines. Just want to figure out what it is, or hear from you what it is you do. The first thing when you wake up.
Aside from checking on my babies,
right,
including my wife. Once I do that, I really have to get into a space where I can be quiet. And the reason why is look, you can obviously see that I'm a talker. I'm a communicator.
Right.
But the reason why I'm able to be a communicator is that I'm quiet enough to get what I call the download. the download of what I'm supposed to be and what I'm supposed to be contributing. If I'm not quiet enough to get that, I can never honor what I'm supposed to be in life. And I know some people may be saying, well, how can you be quiet in the midst of, all the noise that's around you? Notice that I said, I am quiet, because sometimes you're going to have to find your space of quietness in a space of noise.
Right.
I grew up in Brooklyn. There wasn't no quiet.
Right.
Nowhere.
Right.
Nowhere. No place. We had a shotgun apartment. The only two doors was the bathroom and the front door. Everything was a walkthrough. Like, I grew up in a time where, like, there were doorways. This is what was funny. There were doorways, but no doors.
No doors, right? Right.
So the doors in man, I'm really dating myself. So the doors, the doors were created by beads. The little like sheets of like beads, like you can hang them over the edge, and so you got beads like hanging down, right? So if the beads were down, that meant that the door was closed.
Closed, right.
And if you wanted to go in that room, you had to knock on the wall. God forbid you open up them beads, and nobody invited you, and you'd have asked to come in, boy, you might get your head knocked off. You would have closed that door. So even in all of that, I had to learn how to be quiet in order to get what I needed to get. So every single day, my practice is just being quiet long enough to get clear about what I'm supposed to be, who I'm supposed to be, what function I'm supposed to serve that day.
Yeah.
And every day that's going to be different. I'm a man, right? I'm a husband. I'm a father. But David, you know this. Tomorrow, you're going to be faced with choosing to do that again tomorrow. Because if you wanted, you could choose to walk away from all your responsibilities. I could choose to walk away from my wife. I could choose to walk away from my children. Every single day is another choice that I make to be a great husband, a great father, a great man to my community. And I do that by sitting still and getting clear about how I'm supposed to walk that out. What's the function of what I'm supposed to do that day? That's what I do every day. Get quiet long enough to get clear. Get quiet to get clear.
Wow.
So my last question, then we'll let you get out of here, Dondré. When we get the clear from medical professionals and it's truly and genuinely safe, what are you most looking forward to doing post everything that's happening?
Hugging every person in that I love, and even hugging some people that I don't have a relationship with. I think the function of, while God didn't create this virus, I think that God uses things like this in order to give us messaging, in order to give us clarity about certain things. I have often said that people who are struggling during this time often use devices as distractions from dealing with what? Dealing with the pain of our lives, dealing with the things that we need to get whole about. Your phone can be a device. Your car can be a device. Golf. I love golf. Sometimes golf is a device for me.
Yeah.
Right. Go out and right. So we use all of these devices as a distraction to not deal.
Right.
Right. What God is using or allowing this to be used for is for us to have all of those devices taken away from us, all of the distractions, so that we could deal with ourselves. When would you ever have a time like this where you actually had the time and the space to deal with yourself? Would you ever take a spiritual sabbatical to ever deal with yourself? Never. You'd be caught up in, the job, the bills, sleep, wake up, do it again. Job, bills, sleep, wake up, do it again. The vast majority of our society does that.
Right.
And you wonder why the vast majority of people that walk our society are miserable.
Miserable, right.
Because your life can't be about a job and bills. People, the vast majority of people who get divorced, why? Due to financial reasons. What is that? Job and bills. People who get caught up in the job and the bills usually have to have more devices to serve as distractions because they never take the time to deal with themselves. If you want to make anything in life better, you want to make your marriage better, you want to make your kids better, you want to make your business better, make you better. The quickest way to make your marriage better is by making yourself better and your spouse making themselves better. When two people say, I am the problem, but I am the solution, you are getting ready to come into a great marriage. But the minute that one person says, you're the problem, and as soon as we fix you, we're going to have a great marriage.
Right.
Because now that's one person not dealing with themselves. They're like, no, you're the problem. You need to deal with you. I'm good. We're all made of flesh. We're all imperfect. We all need work. We all need to be elevated. So the people who are doing well during this pandemic are the people who make it a practice to deal with themselves, to examine themselves, to elevate themselves. The people who are not doing well are the people who run from themselves. Fact. Do it as an experiment. Look at all the people that you see that are not doing well during this pandemic and see if they make it a practice to deal with themselves. Self-care, elevating themselves, mind, body, spirit. I guarantee you, you will struggle trying to find a person who is dealing with this badly and they make it a practice of dealing with self. That's a person who needs devices to serve as a distraction because the last thing they want to do is deal with themselves.
Wow.
That's what's going on right now.
This has been an incredible discussion, Dondré. We really, really appreciate it. For
And
our
my
audience,
pleasure.
be sure to check out Male versus Man. And again, thank you so much for joining us.
Hey, man, my pleasure. Come back anytime. Check out the book. Check out the digital series on YouTube, Male versus Man. First week was with Will Smith. Last week was with Boris Kojo. I've got a book, Kevin Hart, D.L. Hughley are coming up. And when the show actually goes to air, David, I'm coming to get you too. So this is really necessary to help elevate us as men because it gives us, again, getting back to the original points of information and instruction.
Absolutely, man. Appreciate your time. It's been great.
Hey, man, my pleasure, brother. Anytime.